During the 16th and 17th centuries, some of Europe's most prominent figures truly believed they were made of glass. They avoided sudden movements, stayed away from crowds, and sometimes even wrapped themselves in layers of padding. This strange phenomenon, known as the glass delusion, affected kings, nobles, and scholars alike. The glass delusion first emerged in the late 14th century, and the cases continued to appear into the early 1600s. The unusual condition seemed to target the elite, people who had power, wealth, and status. Those afflicted believed that their bodies, or sometimes just specific parts, were made of fragile glass. They feared that one wrong move could lead them to their own shattering. One of the earliest and most famous cases involved King Charles VI of France, who ruled in the late 1300s. Known as Charles the Mad, he suffered from various mental health issues, one of which was his fear of shattering. Charles would sit still for hours, refusing to move, convinced that even the slightest disturbance would cause him to break. He wore thick padded clothing and even lined his chambers with blankets to protect himself. For Charles, life was a series of calculated, cautious movements. Charles VI was far from alone. Across Europe, numerous nobles and royals shared similar fears. A Spanish nobleman, for instance, refused to sit down unless the chair was heavily cushioned. He believed that if he sat too quickly, he'd break his glass body. A Dutch scholar and writer named Caspar Barlaus recorded the story of a wealthy man who, convinced his legs were glass, avoided any hard surface and even refused to let people touch him. One German patient believed his entire lower body was a glass. He walked cautiously and would only lie down on a thick, soft bedding, terrified that even a small bump could shatter his legs. Others had more specific delusions. Some believed their heads or chests were glass, and they cradled these body parts carefully, never allowing any pressure or contact. Perhaps one of the strangest cases was that of a French poet and scholar named Jean Boucher. He believed that simply brushing against someone could cause his body to shatter. Boucher avoided crowded rooms and lived in a constant state of fear, never letting anyone get too close. Despite the unusual nature of the glass delusion, treatments were common, but remember, this was the Renaissance, a time when doctor often resorted to bloodletting, herbal remedies, and isolation for mental health conditions. Most treatments were ineffective, and those affected were often left to live with their fears. Wealthier patients would go so far as to redecorate their homes, lining rooms with soft materials and padding furniture to create glass-safe environments. Friends and families of the sufferers were baffled, but they accommodated them. In one instance, a wealthy Spanish woman who believed her hands were glass refused to eat solid foods, fearing her glass fingers would break if she used cutlery. She lived for years on only soft foods and liquids, and her family supported her, though they didn't understand her delusion. As bizarre as it may seem, the glass delusion wasn't just about fragility, it was about isolation. People who believed they were made of glass distanced themselves from others, fearing that even a friendly embrace could be deadly. Some went into seclusion entirely, avoiding not only physical contact but also society itself. The glass delusion faded by the 18th century, but it remains one of the history's strangest mental health phenomena. These nobles lived their lives in constant fear of breaking, a reminder how powerful the mind can be in shaping reality.